It is 3:30. I think it's time to start the session. So,
how much time does each paper have?
Papers. Cuarto de hora. Try 12, 15 minutes or 15 minutes more or less. Okay.
Okay.
So the first one, Sigridopoulos, when.
Yes. Can I share my screen?
Yes, please.
I think you need to make me. Yes. Sorry, I was in the contributions. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Stelios Ziglidopoulos. Let me start my time as well. I'm on behalf of my co-authors, Salman, Pavlos, and Roshan. I would like to present this paper, which we've been working on for a while. And because we only have 15 minutes, I'll just go straight into the paper. What we are looking at here is we're basically looking at a number of theories and how they look at the internationalization of a small and medium-sized enterprises from developing countries, from emerging economies, if you want to put it like that. The reason we are doing that is because internationalizing of small and medium-sized enterprises is problematic for them to start with because they don't have all the resources. And there's a lot of literature out there that looks at the resources and the alliances and the networks that small and medium-sized enterprises have to get so that they can internationalize. That is much easier at the developed country level. But at the developing country level, where these SMEs are faced with unstable environments, weak institutions, hostile government policies, market failures, all kinds of problems, it is kind of difficult to use these resources from their environment in order to internationalize. So we're basically saying that we are differentiating between high power actors and low power actors. And we're saying, well, MNEs are high power actors, but what about SMEs who are low power actors? They don't have a lot of power to draw on their resources from their environment so that they can internationalize. How do they deal with that? And in this paper, we're trying to address this question about how SMEs are dealing with this power discrepancy, if you want, that they face in internationalizing. We're looking, I mean, this gap comes from the resource dependency theory of, what are those two guys' names who made it centuries ago? So anyway, the Pfeffer and Salancik, yeah, yes. Anyway, the thing is that the SMEs are basically low power and they face this power imbalance. So we're trying to see how they deal with that. Power has many aspects and resource dependence theory kind of ignores some of them. So we're kind of complementing it or drawing on bargaining theory to help us here. Now, as I said, there's not much time, so I want to move on to the next one. What we're saying here is that high power actors are basically looking at a positional kind of bargaining, because in that case helps them because they have a lot of power and therefore they can, squeeze or sort of impose their will on the other one, because the traditional definition of power is I have power over you if I can get you to do what I want, even though you were not going to do it anyway. You were not going to do it, so now I get you to do it, so that's power, basically. So, but from another perspective, we have this interest-based bargaining, which allows sort of a different version of power, looking at the bargaining power between the two alternatives, two parties. And that is sort of a door, if you want, that allows us to examine the ability of SMEs who do not have a lot of power, especially developing countries, to sort of improve their position. To do that, we investigated a number of firms in Pakistan. Pakistan, because first of all, it's a volatile economy, it has frequent market failures, it has, how should I put it, institutional uncertainty, basically it fits the conditions that we were talking about very well. And in spite of that, small and medium-sized firms in the IT sector, particularly in Pakistan, managed in the last 20 years to increase their exports from 20 million in 2000 to 2 billion in 2017. So in spite of all these issues and the fact that they are small, medium-sized enterprises, these IT firms did very well. So the question that we're asking here is, what we're trying to find out is, how did they do that? We went through a rigorous, we contacted a lot of firms, we investigated a lot of, we did a lot of legwork, if you want. We settled down after rigorous elimination to 13 SMEs. And we basically proceeded with phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 in our analysis. We identified the SMEs internationalization constraints, how to identify them, how they use their networks to overcome that. We limited that to 13 high power actors. We did 13 interviews. And anyway, we ended up with 14 dyadic interactions. We're grouped into 4 case scenarios, including 1 higher power actor and the corresponding low power SMEs. We basically, what we did is oops, hold on. For some reason we're frozen. Oh, yeah, we ended up in 4 different scenarios, something like that. 4 case scenarios that look pretty similar to this. In this case, the government is at the center. There's a powerful entity, if you want. At the second case, it was the higher educational body, the same kind of high power actor versus a number of low power SMEs at the periphery, if you want. Telecom service provider, again, the same story. And business association, again, the same story. So we interviewed we did multiple interviews, we coded the data, and I will not go through all this, but I will focus on the findings. What we did find is that low power SMEs accumulate power from sources outside this exchange relationship to reduce this power imbalance inside the exchange relationship. We saw that SMEs were basically drawing from outside to be able to reduce their power, how to call it, the power imbalance between their relationship, so that they did that with collective bargaining and so on, another number of ways. But they did that. So this decreased power imbalance allowed them to move to interest-based bargaining from positioning bargaining. In other words, proposition 1 is what allowed them to move to, because when the imbalance of power is too large, you cannot have interest-based bargaining. The high power actor will basically just squish you and say, you do that, shut up and do it, basically. So, but when the power is decreased and the gap isn't so big, then the high power actor has to take you into some kind of consideration. And that's when the low power actor, low power firm got in and was able to influence somehow the relationship and engage in interest-based bargaining from positional bargaining, which already improved the situation. Now, the proposition 3 that we have here is that interest-based bargaining increased the dependency of low power SMEs on the high power counterparts. In a sense, they're beginning to see the higher power counterpart, the lower power SMEs, as partners that add value to them. They kind of need them, maybe not a lot, but they need them. So it's a win-win situation that already improves their position, the SME's position within this network in dealing with a high power actor. And basically, what we understood from talking to talking to a number of players, that the underlying objective of low power SMEs is employing interdependencies management strategies to increase their power, or at least to achieve power balance, rather than reduce their dependency on the high power counterpart. So basically, they're trying to shift the power and the dependency away from them a little bit, so they can have more power and they can have less dependency on the high power, and they can make the high power power firms more dependent on them. In that way, they can sort of be more profitable or internationalize or use these resources to internationalize. We can see here, we've sort of gathered our findings in one table, which basically we're saying that if you look at the exchange relationship between these two imbalanced partners before and after, we can see a sort of a shift, that the bargaining style moved from positional bargaining to interest-based bargaining, which is already an improvement on the size of on the side of the SME. The power distance went from high to low. The availability of resources was from fewer to higher. The FOCA firm's dependence on its counterpart, in other words, the dependence of the high power actor, was from less to more, because as we said, the SME now was seen as part of the game, as part of us, as part of us contributing to our advantage. And the perceived environmental uncertainty was reduced from high to much less, because low, because the problem, the issue was that basically now the firms had some kind of defense mechanism, and they were taken into consideration, and they were not kind of existing at the whim of the high power, the high power entity in the government, the higher education institution, whatever we're talking about, all those issues that we found. Now, this paper makes a number of contributions here. The first and primary contribution that we think we make is by contributing to the literature on SMEs internationalization, by highlighting how SMEs build their defense mechanisms, given that they are low power and they don't have, basically they don't have a high power level. How do they build the defense mechanisms against what we call the dark sides of networks? But what you could also call is the higher powered entities in their environment, which they need to access the resources so that they can internationalize. Second, from a resource dependence perspective, we basically say here that firms do not always intend to decrease their dependence on others, though they seek power with needing to reduce the dependence because it enables them to counter any opportunistic behavior of their counterparts. In other words, it's a sort of a more pragmatic kind of attitude that we saw, that small, medium-sized enterprises, in this particular setting at least, they didn't have any illusions that they're going to be M&Es overnight and they're going to have enough power to be able to get rid of some things in their environment or control them. But at least reducing the uncertainty and getting some fighting power, some control over their environment was better than the alternative. Finally, bargaining value also adds value to the whole, our paper adds value to the bargaining power by articulating the how, the mechanism of how low power firms shift from positioning bargaining, to interest-based bargaining, and by this they already improve their position because they include themselves in the basically the interest of the high power firm. Practical implications for this firm, from this paper, we can say that it would include it would unlock potential strategic options for SMEs, shows them what they could do. It informs managers about that they do not necessarily need to reduce the dependence, but basically they need to find ways to move from positioning to interest-based bargaining and thus increase their power and their control of their environment, if you want. And basically, it's a way of showing how this study, how can firms or managers in SMEs accumulate power from sources outside the exchange relationship to use them in managing this exchange relationship that they're dealing with in their need to. And that's our references, and that's basically it. Thank you very much. I think I was a little bit ahead of time, but we would appreciate any kind of comments, suggestions, and I'm stopping the sharing now.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. How do I do that? Okay, good. That's how I do that. Thank you.
Maybe someone have any question or comment? Fiorenza, please.
Yes, I'd like to understand on the basis on which you measure the power of SMA on focus person. Is the power to control the prices, is the power to be involved in some high-tech operations, because if you don't specify which type of power are you talking about, the reasoning is very abstract.
I did not hear that very well. Maybe Salman, who is also in the session, can heard that and can answer.
Okay. Yes,
I
one
don't know.
moment.
Sorry, I couldn't hear. Is that possible if somebody can repeat the question?
Yeah, I heard.
I try to follow you, but your reason is a little bit abstract for me. So how do you measure the power? Is the power to determine prices? Is the power to have the work because I can give a subcontracting work to others and so on? Come
The camera is there.
Yeah.
Or do you have other indicators of power? Because you know, the power theory in practice is not within the strategic analysis, because firms are in the market and they are similar. So only large firms can have power because they control the sales, they control the job offer and so on. So in this case, it's not clear if it's this, is it like this, okay? Could you follow me?
Yes, we can understand. Should I go with the answer or you want? Thank you for asking this question. You know, the traditional, that's one of our contribution. Traditionally, resource dependency theory measures the power based on the dependency. So if you are taking more resources from somebody, more dependent, that means you have less power against them because you are dependent on somebody. And that's why the resource dependency theory took the line that you try to reduce your dependence or increase other dependence. Whereas this study found that power has different meanings. They're coming from legitimate power, there is collective power, and different sources of power. And it's not only dependent on exchange relationship. Like it's same in example, like if you are in a developing country like Pakistan, and if you want to influence some institution, or let's say in China, you usually use political linkage to influence your relationship with the government. Even though government is not the direct relationship, but you try to get power from other sources. So that's like this paper believes that power comes from different sources. So it's not limited to exchange relationship, which is dependency. If you are dependent on resources, that means you are less power. No, you can still increase your dependence and still be high power, like increase your power by using maybe, in our case, firm use collective power, which was like they combined with other people. If I take the same example, they were dependent on a telecommunication company, which was 4 bigger companies in the country. They were providing telecommunication services to all these firms. So for bigger firms, they were dealing like what data packages they were giving them prices. But for small firms, they were giving one price, take it or leave it. What the small firms did, more than 100 firms combined and collectively, and they negotiated with all 4 firms together for one price. And after that, their price was reduced to 10 times less than the previous exchange, this whole process. So that helps them to control it. So individually firms got more dependent because after that agreement, they were having that only source of data sources, but they were like, they were having more power because if that firm was going to do something bad with them, they were going to face all 100 firms together. So that's the power, like it believes that power comes from all different sources.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. We need to continue to the next paper. Maybe we can let, I mean, the discussion is very interesting. Maybe if you have time at the end of the session, we can talk more about this. Second paper, Kano, please, when you want.
Okay. Can you see my slide and can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Let me start my presentation. Thank you for the opportunity to give a presentation at this online session today. My name is Hirokazu Kano. In this presentation, I would like to talk about the effect of early internationalization on the subsequent international expansion. Let me begin by talking about background and motivation of this work. The research on international entrepreneurship focuses on the phenomenon of early internationalization. Recent work seeks to explain this phenomena in terms of discovery and exploitation of opportunities across borders. Especially, the predominant focus of this literature is on the antecedents of the discovery of these opportunities. Extensive studies provide empirical evidence showing that multi-level antecedents can stimulate early internationalization. However, the extant literature has largely overlooked the post-entry process of early internationalizing firms. Internationalization is a dynamic and continuous process in which a firm increases its level of commitment to foreign markets through accumulating experience and increasing knowledge on foreign markets and foreign operations. This dynamic and path-dependent aspects of internationalization process suggest that earlier initiation of internationalization may influence the subsequent process. However, extant research mainly focuses on antecedent factors acting upon the initiation of internationalization and downplays the effects of early internationalization on subsequent expansion. The aim of this study is to fill this gap. To fill this gap, we draw on Penrosian theory of firm growth and judgment-based view of entrepreneurship. Penrose maintains that the growth of firm is derived from managerial learning. She emphasized a conceptual distinction between resources and the services of resources. This distinction implies that entrepreneurs convert firm resources into services based on subjectively perceived productive opportunities. These subjective opportunities stem from experience of entrepreneurs. They continuously experiment with the resources and their combination. This experimentation results in an increase in knowledge and understanding about the bundle of firm-specific resources, and then facilitate to perceived growth opportunities to utilize their resources more fully. Accordingly, managerial learning is an important driver of firm growth. We complement this Penrosian logic with judgment-based view of entrepreneurship. This view of entrepreneurship is compatible with the Penrosian idea in the sense that both approaches emphasize the subjective nature of entrepreneurial judgment and experimental aspects of entrepreneurial process and uncertainty. The central problem in this approach is how this experimental process is best organized. Specifically, this approach argues that firms exist as a lower cost mechanism over markets for entrepreneurs to experiment their judgment on resource combination freely and flexibly. Since entrepreneurial judgment is subjective and novel, it is costly for entrepreneurs to articulate their judgment precisely. The cost involved in this context can be seen as dynamic transaction cost, which is the cost of informing, teaching, and persuading other firms needed in the exploitation process. And this can be mitigated by internalizing these activities. Furthermore, this approach focuses on country-level institutional environment that influence entrepreneurial process and argues that institutions that support economic freedom allow entrepreneurs to experiment with resource combination at a low cost. Overall, this view of entrepreneurship suggests that the efficiencies and effectiveness of managerial learning depend on how entrepreneurial process organized. Based on this extended Penrosian perspective, we posit that through early internationalization, entrepreneurs can quickly start managerial learning, and that the choices of foreign operation mode and foreign location in the process of early internationalization affect the efficiencies and effectiveness of managerial learning, in turn subsequent geographic expansion. First, as a main effect, we focus on the influence of the initial choice of operation mode and the subsequent level of internationalization. Based on judgment-based view of entrepreneurship, we can expect that equity-based operation mode, such as joint ventures and wholly owned subsidiaries, provide entrepreneurs a strong control over their decisions. This advantage enables entrepreneurs to experiment with their judgment and judgment on the combination of resources and markets across borders flexibly. Through early entries and operations through FDI, entrepreneurs can quickly start their experimentation and substantially learn the potential to utilize their resources. Accordingly, we expect that experience obtained through an equity-based operation mode is positively associated with subsequent geographic scope. Then I discussed two moderating factors. The first moderating factor is the quality of regulation in the host countries. I argue that the quality of regulation on labor and credit markets and regulations related to starting business is relevant to the cost of resource mobilizations. Therefore, high quality regulation can reduce the cost of entrepreneurial experimentation, and thus it can enhance these activities. We expect that concentration of foreign operation into countries with high quality regulation positively moderates the association. The second moderating factor is the region. External research suggests that international expansion outside home region is likely to impose challenges on firms because of these similarities among regions. In contrast, we expect that these similarities among regions can also provide the potential for entrepreneurship across borders, such as arbitrage opportunities or opportunities for novel resource combinations. Furthermore, the process and routines for integrating and coordinating foreign activities obtained through the operation in the outside home region may reduce the managerial constraints on subsequent expansion. Then we posit that the concentration of foreign operation in outside home regions positively moderates the relationship. And please let me this slide. And overall, the results provide support for three our hypotheses. But please let me just skip the details of skills, details of results. Then I would like to move on to the conclusion slide. Several contributions emerge from this study. I'd like to emphasize especially first one. First, by focusing on the post-entry process of early internationalizing firms, we find that initial choices on operation mode and foreign location in the course of early internationalization can influence subsequent international expansion. Second, our approach suggests that early internationalization can be understood not only as a result of antecedent, but also as a cause of subsequent expansion. Third, this paper may respond to calls for the development of theoretical foundation of AI research. Finally, our findings may provide a managerial contribution. External research emphasizes that FDI, especially that into outside home region, is challenging for new ventures, which lack resources and experience. But our findings suggest that firms can gain the learning effect from these choices. Especially according to recent paper, radically changing COVID world or post-COVID world, the speed by which international new venture learn and use their learning can spell the difference between survival and failure. Managers may be advised to pay more attention to these learning effects. And that's all I have to say. Thank you for your listening.
Okay, thank you. Maybe any question or any comment in the room? Nothing? Yes. Can you maybe move here? Oh. Yes. Much better. And if you can look at the camera, he can see you.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I just have it's a little bit unclear to me how you measure the subsequent expansion. So what do you mean by subsequent expansion, in whether it's in terms of speed of expansion or whether it's in terms of scope of expansion, and how it's related to, do you have some kind of data in your sample that relate the subsequent expansion to the performance in general? How do those firms perform? Yeah, so that's my, thank you.
Yeah.
Did you get me clearly?
Yes. Thank you for your question. I measured, I employed geographic scope as dependent variable. I measured it as a number of countries where focal firms had foreign subsidiaries.
Again.
And then you also have the data that relate the scope of expansion to the performance, general performance of those firms. Or your paper is just focusing on.
Okay, come here, please. Sorry, can it's much better.
Yes, thank you. I got you. But do you also have the data that can relate that scope of subsequent expansion to the general performance of those firms? I'm just curious about how those firms perform with the scope of expansion.
I don't hear well.
I'm asking again. I'm just curious about if you have the data that can relate those expansions, the subsequent expansion, to the general performance of the firm. Because if the bigger scope of expansion don't generate a better performance, so there's no point for firms to expand to different countries, right? So that's my questions. My second question. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I try to calculate the expansion of geographic scope, but our sample firms is early internationalizing firms. So the expansion is not so counted. So So yeah, our sample farms are relatively small. So so I'm sorry, it's my limitation. I need to improve my research design. Thank you.
I know that you have used a different database and you have integrated information from different data. So maybe you can think about it and give an answer at the end of the session. So we continue with the third paper. Cavelotti?
Yes.
Systematic review. Okay.
Yes, can you say it? Okay, good. So let me try to give you a very fast description of what you can find in the paper that is by me and Vas Taras from the University of North Carolina. So it is a very humble literature review about global virtual teams. I think most of you would be familiar with what they are. So it basically means people from all over the world working online. This is something that has become popular thanks to globalization and communication technology improving. We have been speaking about virtual teams since the 80s. They became popular in the 90s, but it is actually 1999 with a paper by Yavram Pa that actually we have for first time the world global virtual team. So the popularity of this concept has been growing, I don't want to say exponentially, but very, very fast recently, as you can see here from the Web of Science number of the publications, but also on Scopus or on Google Scholar. So it has become very popular. COVID-19 has been making this even more popular. And we know that a high number of people, according to OECD, is working nowadays online. So the lockdowns has been doing this something very, very hot and important. So the objective is actually to make a picture of the state of the art. And we have been doing so with a bibliometry that is based on Web of Science. So the typical research of the systematic literature review like this one, of course, is going to find the key authors, the key university, the clusters of publications, and of course, future avenue of research. I will be very fast on the methods, and I invite you to go into the paper. So the key word is global virtual teams, not GVT. We have not been using that expression that is typical in people that are working in this area, because if you go into the literature, it means basically something very different in medicine, but all the papers that are actually making reference to global virtual teams use the entire expression. The extraction is 15th of June, and it is from Web of Science. So the software that we have been analyzing is VOS Viewer. That is a typical software for bibliometry. We have been looking for citation, co-authorship, co-citation, and also co-occurrence of keywords. I don't want to be long about the definition of co-citation and the citation links. You can find this in the paper, but the typical unit of analysis that we've been using are authors, journals, articles, universities, and countries. So I would skip on the methodology. And I will invite you to go into the paper. And on the opposite, I would like to show you some of the results that we have. So this is the list of the papers that have been hosting those publications. The only database that we have been using is Web of Science. We know that this is a limitation. We might have Scopus or maybe Google Scholar, but we also thought that the best articles are published on Web of Science. So you can see from this list which are the most relevant journals, especially the Journal of International Management. The number of papers has been growing, as you see, constantly. But let me show you some of the elaboration that we have been doing with those viewers and what this software can offer in order to make a description. So here, for example, you can see the most relevant journals. So the size of the circle is actually the number of publications, and the color that is shifting from deep blue to yellow is the average citations of paper. So you can see the Journal of International Management as a relevant position in this map. It is actually not the only one. There is also a cluster of information management journals on the back that are also relevant. Organizational science on the right, you can see it is actually the one that is hosting articles that have been very cited, but it is also because it has been hosting the very early articles on the field. Here you have the same pictures as before, but the size of the circle here on the opposite is actually the number of citations. So you can see that organization science that have been hosting the very first articles on the topic in 1999 is actually the very big circle. But Journal of International Management has been growing. So there's been a shift from organizational science, information management towards, I would say, international management. If we look at the map of authors, for example, you can see that my co-author, Vas Taras, has a pretty important role here at the bottom on the left. It is the largest circle. It is not a dominating role, but it is an important player in this network. And the color here is the average citations. You see Javerampa on the very right. That is the first article, 1999, Organization Science, that is on the yellow, so a lot of citations. So of course, the oldest the paper, the more cited they tend to be. And you can see it from this new map, where you can see the average date of publication. Again, the unit of analysis is the author, and you can see that name once again, Javerampa, I hope the pronunciation is correct. That is actually a high number of citations, but it is more on the deep blue in respect to the yellow and green that you can see is coming up on the left of the picture. So the importance of global virtual teams, it is coming from information management, but it is becoming increasingly more important in international management and international business that is on the left of this picture. We have always also been looking at countries, and it is no surprise that the United States seem to have a very important role here as a number of the documents, published articles, of course, on Web of Science. And also the yellow, you see it is the highest number of citations per documents. In this one, again, it is the same picture that is before, but we have been trying to highlight also the average date of publications by the documents. But and the circle is the number of cited documents. Again, the United States has a pretty dominant role, and as before, France and China are following. Regarding universities, many players, as you can see from these pictures, maybe again a very important role is coming from the University of North Carolina, where my co-authors, but other authors are based. That is at the center of these pictures, and also you see the number of citations per document that is going to light green and yellow. That is at the very center around not just University of Carolina, but also University of Texas, Florida State University, and other American players. In this one, the article is the unit of analysis, so the most quoted articles. And you see that here the big boys are the very first articles that have been published around 1990, 1999 and 2000. So Java and Powell, also Montoya, and you see the circle is big. It means a high number of citations, but it is actually on the blue side. So it is older than the yellow and green. So there is an area of the international business and international management that has been growing out of this organizational science and information management. Here, the author is the unit of analysis, and we are looking at co-authorships. Again, Vastaras, but also Jimenez, Alfredo from Spain have an important role in these co-authorships networks. This can originate in part from the X-Culture project, if you're familiar with it. There is a cluster at the left on the bottom, very yellow with high number of citations. That basically it is actually one single paper with many co-authors from 2013 that is very high quoted. And again, here it is the same as the previous one, but here we are looking at the date of publications of the paper. And as I told you, at the bottom on the left, it is a single paper. You see the color is always the same for those authors, and in fact, it is very much towards the left side of the spectrum of colors in the blue. And here there is the same sort of description, but here basically when we have so many links, we use the colors in order to describe them. And again, a very important role of my co-author is coming forward. Here we are looking at co-authorship. Sorry if I go fast, but I want to try to give you a look at what we have been doing, and then you can go to the papers. So if we look at the co-authorship, but then at country, again, the US has an important role, but not at the center of the network, as you can see. But the role is important as number of articles, and also the average citations of those articles. Here it is again, but we are looking at the average date of the publication. And again, as the USA is the place where most of the papers are coming from, the average date of publication is actually around 2013, 2012. If we look at the university as unit of analysis for co-authorship, again, there is an important role of University of North Carolina on the left, but many other players, but the most thick clusters is actually on the left side. Here it is about co-citation. I am close to the end. If you look at the co-citation and we look at authors, we have three main clusters. The red one is more about, I would say, international management and business. General management is the blue, more or less. And on the opposite, information management and behavioral science is more on the green. The same we can do with journals. And again, we have in the blue, you see the Journal of International Business Studies, Management International Review on the very right. General management in, I would say, is mostly the blue part, Academy of Management, Academy of Manager Review, and then we have the information management on the red side. If we look at the keywords that are coming out, here I have a less clear picture. Of course, global virtual teams is dominant. there is a thick clusters around performance, communication, trust, very important topics indeed. But actually, I am not still certain about how to make sense of this. But then, in the end, we think we have been providing pictures about the most important authors, articles, university, nations. And if we should think about possible research path for the future, probably a very dominant part is actually the balance between cohesiveness and diversity. So the more the cohesiveness, the more efficient the team is, but of course, the less creative it is. So this is a very important topic. Limitation, everything is Web of Science. Some of you might say we have to merge Scopus and Google Scholar, but technically this is very difficult to do right now with the software that we have, to be honest. And but it is also true that Web of Science is the most important database. So maybe we have been favoring rigor instead of comprehensiveness. This is all, and I think I've been staying on time, despite the so many slides that I have been using. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I don't know if someone has any question or suggestion.
I have a question regarding the paper. I was just wondering if there aren't any synonyms you might consider for your literature review.
Please, could
So apart from global virtual teams. So
sorry, I didn't understand your question at the very beginning. I was not able to hear, but I think you have been asking me if I've been thinking about using other keywords. Is this correct? Yes, I have been thinking about this, but then in the end, I thought that actually what I am actually investigating here is very straightforward. We want to know about global virtual teams. That is at the very core, for example, of the X-Culture project, if you're familiar with it. That is a very famous project in IB. And we thought that we cannot imagine a single paper that does not have that word, global virtual team. So it may seem limitations because I understand many literature review use different keywords, but actually we are very selective. We want to know about the global virtual teams literature. So this has been on purpose.
okay. We have an additional comment from the room.
Hi. Hello, my name is Rodrigo from Universal Baza. I'm not familiar with citation analysis, but when I was reading your article, I was interested in more practical outcomes, such as outcomes of a higher volume of global teams, such as if you have more people work from home, have less people traveling, so impacting the number of international assignments. So that has more implication for international mobility and the number of volume of international assignments right now. So did you look at those more practical outcomes that comes from those analyses? I'm not sure if it's also the goal of your analysis, but this is one of the questions that I have. Yeah.
What I can tell you is that we are very well aware that global virtual teams are actually increasing in importance. And we have been working with global virtual teams in the X-Culture projects since 2010. And we can testify that their importance has been growing very much. And I can say that in my class, I did not even realize that COVID-19 was there because we were actually working online and we were very much structured as global virtual teams in my class. So yes, I was able to see the importance of this. And yes, it will be growing. And that's why we thought it was a good idea to make a literature review at this point that we hope to submit anytime soon to a journal. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ernesto. Now we have to continue with the next paper. So Fatima, it's also about virtual teams. So. Okay.
Okay, am I audible? Hello?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So dear respected professors and attendees, in my presentation, I'll be focusing on the theoretical part of my research. I'll be explaining what I have done until now and the rationale behind it. By the end of the presentation, you'll grasp the meaning of collective creativity of multicultural virtual teams and how it can be fostered. I'll shed light on my research purpose, research questions, definition of essential concepts, methodology to better understand the processes that led to the research gap, conceptual framework, and results. The outbreak of COVID-19 resulted in forcing organizations to adapt virtual communication temporarily or permanently. According to Harvard Business Review, 275 managers from multinational companies reported challenges such as overwhelming workload, task ambiguity, low motivation, fading relationships due to remote work. These challenges inspired my research. To get a bigger picture, I have done further research about remote working environments, and according to Survey of Society for Human Resource Management about virtual teams, above 50% of companies had employees working remotely. Surprisingly, 72% of organizations reported that brainstorming solutions was the most successful activity that virtual teams were used for. According to Nemuro, there is an increased focus on creativity and teams which can generate ideas and brainstorm solutions. So the first thought I had was that the creativity in these virtual teams is not an individual one. It is what Campbell explained, result of collective effort that emerges from collaboration and contribution of team members. However, not having a common ground and cultures that shapes employees' motivation can raise problems. It is not easy for upper management to navigate multicultural and virtual teams, unique interpersonal challenges, and having the latest technologies along with environment tinged with uncertainty is not a solution. As an applied researcher, I focus on studying these teams' challenges. As a basic academic researcher, I brainstorm WH questions and consider theories that can answer these questions. After conducting exploratory research, I was able to uncover new elements and relationships that helped in formulating a clear, precise research question. The arching question was, how do intercultural competence create processes to develop creativity in multicultural virtual team? To answer these questions, I needed to answer 3 sub-questions. The first and second question focus on the importance of intercultural competence and socio-emotional processes to creativity in general. The third question focus on the collaboration of these 2 concepts to foster collective creativity. For my exploratory descriptive research, I lean towards relativism to select accurate naming and definition from classical and new articles. The literature choice was subjective, built primarily on constructivist perspective to present a base for multidisciplinary review. Now I'll go swiftly through some relevant terms and explain their interrelated relationships. The most adjacent definition for collective creativity that scholars agreed on, it is process based on positive interaction and willingness to support others by sharing relevant information, knowledge, experience, and expertise, and learning from each other. When that happens, we breed new ideas and we brainstorm solutions. And multiculturalism has an impact on creative processes. However, according to Scheffer, members of virtual teams who come from multicultural background live in a society which has several cultures. However, the interaction is task-related and there is no process of interpersonal conversation. In cross-cultural environment, there is interaction, but one's culture considered the norm or the dominant one. And it leads to only individual transformation, not a collective one. When we have intercultural background, we have deep understanding, awareness, and respect for all cultures. And we develop deep relationship. Everyone changes due to learning from each other, and ideas cross-fertilize. So how can individuals' mindsets shift to intercultural one? Many papers suggested that developing intercultural competence can help in achieving that. So what is it exactly? It is having curiosity and knowledge about ours and others' diverse background, being sensitive to cultural differences, being ready to challenge and change our perspective, and having the skills to interact after fine-tuning of our behavior and attitude. It is an ongoing learning process. It is the bridge between diversity and inclusion that leads to collaboration. However, obtaining intercultural competence is an exhilarating challenge. Bennett Scale explains the stages developing intercultural competence go through, starting from denial and ending with integration, where intercultural sensitivity developed by going through phases to transform monocultural mindset to intercultural mindset. According to the scholars, intercultural competence creates a culture that fosters creativity. So how can virtual teams be creative? The secret of how lies in intercultural competence impact on socio-emotional processes, which is a part of virtual team structure model. These processes involve trust, cohesion, and relationship building, where when they are built, usually they're built over time. That leads to changes in individuals' relationship, emotions, and personality. And interacting with more skilled peers advances cognitive development. The literature suggests collective creativity is unquestionably inspired by individual creativity. My question for you, if the person has all the components of creativity, does it mean he or she will share knowledge or have the open mind to accept others' ideas? According to Amabel Zohan Shelley, the intrinsic motivation needs to be triggered. After reading papers in field of psychology, sociology, and management, and analyzing theories, I found all of them directly or indirectly suggest that socio-emotional processes can motivate individuals to collaborate. To do that, we need a nourishing environment. Here, the concept of third culture emerges. However, we have to understand the concept of culture first. According to Haviland, it's unconsciously learned. It is a breeding ground for sharing other behaviors and patterns of others, dynamically adaptive, integrated, where we adapt practices from other cultures without diminishing our own. Casimir mentioned individuals from various cultures combine their experiences in order to create a new community. After 9 years, Bailey combined multiple cultures in his research. And for Broom, it is a communicative space. These researchers define the third culture as a common information structure consists of team and task knowledge, as well as principles and norms embedded of two or more participants to create a new culture. Earlier, I have mentioned ontological and epistemological part of my research diagram. Now I'll be focusing on the methodology. During authoring this paper, the snowballing procedure was applied for independence of research after defining criteria for including and excluding. For integrative literature mapping and review, secondary data was collected and read reflectively to assess the methodological quality of the studies and to establish whether the research findings are consistent and generalizable. Then a concept of matrix was chronologically organized, starting from the most earliest and ending with the latest articles published about main concepts. Finally, I outlined a conceptual framework to study the causal relationship between concepts. To confirm the originality of the research gap, all the academic articles were exported to BibTeX on Mendeley. Then text mining was done to create a map based on clustered concepts. A network visualization clearly showed the researchers had conducted studies on the relationship between creativity and competence in virtual teams. However, there was no indication how intercultural competence fosters creativity. And there was no direct reference to socio-emotional processes and creativity, where an explored relevant linkage was found. To outline the hypotheses, the conceptual model was structured by adapting Gladstein's 1984 model of group behavior. This model consists of 3 stages: input, and we have transformation, which is positive, and output. When members' intercultural competence shape the communication across cultures, that leads to inclusion and minimizing the diversity gap and increased cultural agility, which affects socio-emotional processes and individuals' metacognitive thinking about the task. When members are flexible, adaptable, and have empathy, they engage and become supportive of each other. They think out loud and share their ideas without fear of judgment. When a common third culture of psychological safety is cultivated, where everyone matters, growth mindset activated, and according to Adair, all the diverse cultures connect to one mutual purpose, which is solving a problem in my research. I would like to highlight the red arrow at the bottom that represents the time constructs need to interact during the lifetime of a project or until the solutions are found. To sum up, for my research, I explored the concept of creativity on a personal level and on a team level, and its ties with intercultural competence and socio-emotional processes to answer the research question. I'm planning to communicate with companies in the tech industry to collect data and to test the model empirically and expand my research further. I aspire to produce validated, trusted model that can help in simulating collective creativity, and most importantly, that can help in generating original and valuable solutions. Here are some of my references. And thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to be part of this conference. And now the floor open for your questions and your suggestions.
Okay, thank you very much, Fatima. I don't know if someone have any comment or question, or maybe some of you, Ernesto, maybe this is close to your topic. Or
yes, it is close to my field, but I do not have really a specific question for Fatima. I wish good luck for her PhD, but I do not have a question for her.
I'd like to mention something during my thesis.
Your micro, I think, sounds not very well, Fatima. Now we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Now. Okay. Then I think it's better go to the last paper, Felix.
Yes, thank you.
We have enough time, so.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So welcome to today's research paper presentation. Coming to the agenda, we will start with a brief introduction and the relevance of the project, followed by the theoretical framework and the methodological approach. Then we will have a look at the research findings and the discussion section before going over to conclusion and the research outlook. So when talking about careers in academia, two different facts arise. First, the academic job market became increasingly global, and international experience has recently gained momentum for careers in higher education. And second, there will be an increasing number of international applicants for national professorships in the future. With that in mind, for career planning, it raises the question whether international experience pays off and how much experience abroad is beneficial to career advancement. The focus of existing works largely relies on two different streams of literature, human capital theory and social network view, that have been analyzed to a great extent in isolation, leading to controversial research finding on the effect of internationality on career success. So given the tendency in the relevant literature to focus primarily on the benefits, it's usually the costs that remained unobserved. Therefore, we would like to explore the research question in more detail. Does international experience accelerate or delay scholars' career advancement? Human capital theory argues that scholars accumulate international human capital and new credentials and skills while being abroad. It is expected that labor markets reward them for these investments by offering career-related advantages. Therefore, the stream of research following the human capital view argues in favor of international experience that shapes research, teaching, and network relationships, resulting in enhanced speed of career advancement. In contrast, social network theory argues why being abroad, social capital accumulated in a particular country will diminish after a while because network relationships require time and energy. Thus, it is expected that social interactions with decision makers and peers in the origin country tend to be sharply reduced, causing a weakening of ties. Drawing on the social network view, it becomes more clear that international experience may have a decreasing effect on the career progress at home. So both streams of research seem to provide contradictory assumptions on the influence of international experience on career progress. However, we argue that a more nuanced view can be achieved through integration. So by integrating both perspectives, we argue that scholars have the largest increase in career progress at early stages of international experience, but over time, additional gains from being international taper off, they correspond with diminishing marginal returns. The costs of internationalization mainly arise at extensive levels of the international experience, where the individual faces difficulties to establish and maintain its network relationships with home. Therefore, we argue that there is a turning point at which the benefits of international experience follow the human capital view are outweighed by the costs of social capital according to the social network view. Consequently, our hypothesis states as follows: there is a U-shaped relationship between international experience and time to full professorship. In addition, we integrate scholars' research productivity as our first moderating variable to explore whether it has an influence on that relationship. We argue that higher productivity leads to more visibility and recognition as it corresponds with regular participation at conferences or increased publication in research outlets. We assume that the more productive scholars will easier receive job offers or find host institutions abroad. Given the assumption that temporary experience abroad is beneficial for career success, it is facilitated under conditions of a higher research productivity. Therefore, we argue that productivity moderates the U-shaped relationship between international experience and time to full professorship in such a way that the U-shaped relationship flattens with higher productivity. As our second moderating variable, we explore the effect of scholars' numbers of citations on that relationship. Our line of argument develops as follows. As a frequently used indicator, citations measure the scientific impact of the research or even its quality. Therefore, academic quality can to a certain extent also be defined by the number of citations. So given that the quality of its academic staff is important for research and teaching and the competitive position of the higher education institution, it causes them to favor scholars with the more citation, as they will also benefit from this greater recognition. So being sought after first and foremost advances renewed scholars in obtaining some time of international experience, which is considered beneficial for career advancement. Therefore, we hypothesize as well as follows. The number of citations moderate the U-shaped relationship between international experience and time to full professorship in such a way that the U-shaped relationship will flatten with the more citations. So here's our conceptual model, which based on three different hypotheses: the direct effect of international experience on time to full professorship and the flattening effect stemming from productivity and more citations. So to collect data, we draw on a list of German universities and identify departments and research institutes of management faculty members. So data on scholars' career paths were mostly hand-collected and stemming from CV information and other secondary sources, for example, LinkedIn. Our sample consists of 229 full management professors employed by the end of 2020. And this completion rate is basically similar to other studies in this field. So as our dependent variable time to professorship is count in nature, we relied on negative binomial regression analysis as an appropriate model for our data set. In our analysis, we included selection of control variables, and we employed robustness checks in the form of different variables and model verification. So here you can see our results. Basically, we are able to verify all three hypotheses. At first, we have the significant and linear effect, as well as the squared effect of international experience on time to professorship. In addition, we are able to confirm the moderating effect stemming from higher productivity and more citations on that relationship. So in line with our theoretical assumptions, we also observe a direct effect of both measures on our dependent variable. So the conceptual model shows the effect size and standard errors of the respective effects. When comparing both moderating effects, we can see that the flattening effect stemming from the higher number of citations is slightly stronger in relation to scholars' productivity, and throughout all different models, the effect remains significant. So the figures show the U-shaped relationship for H1 and the curves for our moderating effects for H2 and H3. Further, we can see the downward shift of this relationship stemming from higher productivity and scholarly citations. So coming to the contribution of our study, overall, the study offers a more detailed understanding regarding scholars' career progress in academia. However, scholars striving for an academic career in the future should carefully decide for how long and where to gain international experience. So when being we being aware of our findings in advance, it might be the case that scholars' likelihood for accepting foreign assignments located at large geographical distances or with communication deficits from home, they might decrease. Further, we are able to contradict anecdotal evidence that states the more international experience, the better. In addition, we would recommend that accumulating the international experience abroad more regularly is advanced than one-time extensive stays abroad. Just so further, the moderating variable extends our view on these influential factors on the relationship. From those, we can recommend that formation of diverse research teams and the collaboration with co-authors improves the visibility, as it also shows a higher probability of being cited. Our results suggest that it's not only the quantity of the output that is rewarded, but primarily the quality. So ultimately, our study is subject to some limitations that can serve as a starting point for further research. Of course, we focus only in the German context, and that lowers the general meaning of our findings. Then we cannot provide implications about scholars who received their first professorship in a foreign country, and they haven't been appointed quickly either. And our time to professorship measurement is not intended to question the variety of different motives, such as personal aspirations for career satisfaction, for accumulating international experience. And by further research could expand our career advancement concept and might argue whether different elements vary in their impact on career success. And ultimately, future studies might also take into consideration the effect of the location or the culture and its influence on different aspects of international careers. So thereby, I'm at the end of the presentation. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much, Felix. Some questions or comment? Fianza, please. Very interesting.
And I look at the window. Okay, thank you very much for your paper. It clearly was very difficult to follow, so perhaps my questions are stupid. The first is, did you find any variation for the European countries on your results? Or can you, explicitly say that in Germany is different than in UK? And the second is, how is that clear for me? How did you measure productivity? Because productivity is very difficult in academia. Is the number of papers, is the number of papers of good quality, or is the number of citation, and so on. Thanks.
Thank you for your questions. So regarding the first one, it's actually a limitation that our study is just based on the German context. However, as there is a high diversity with regards to academian structures, we did not consider other countries. Therefore, we cannot really contribute to the results of any other country. So it's just a national view. And we measure productivity by the number of publications divided through the time which was needed prior the first professorship. So then we have a score which could be addressed by every researcher.
Okay.
Do you understand the number of publication as a crude number is very limited, because I can publish a lot of articles on a small German journal that is very local, or I can publish on very prestigious things. So in my view, this is a very important limitation, but okay.
Yeah, we wanted to observe the quality aspect with the number of citations, what we did actually, and the quantity aspect we wanted to integrate just by counting the number of publications divided through time, so that we have the quality aspect measured with citations and the quantity aspect measured with the publication. But of course, I can understand your thoughts that it will be a limitation.
Ernesto.
Yes, thank you. I have been lifting my digital hand for some time, but Professor Bellussi has the advantage of being there and has been stealing some of my questions. I greet her. I think it is a very interesting paper. I appreciated it very much. I especially appreciated the idea of this paper, because we are so much overwhelmed by international experience that we are sort of fed up at some point, and we have the doubt that they are beneficial. something that I think is missing in the picture, but maybe it's my fault. I think it is very important the size of the country. I would say actually the cultural size. It is no surprise to me that this paper is coming from Germany. But if we look at other, and it probably if you are going to replicate this exercise in the US, I would think the result would be even stronger. But what about small European country or even developing country? I think there should be a correlation between the cultural size of the country and the results that you have. So the weaker the country, I would expect, the more the international experience would be important. So it is not a question, it is just a comment.
Thank you for your comment. I will definitely keep this for further consideration to maybe extend this view in addition to other countries and whether it's transferable to UK or smaller European countries. So yeah, thank you.
We have an additional comment. Can you please?
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. What do you mean by the international experience? Do you limit it to certain places of the world, or it includes all areas of the world? Thank you.
We accumulated the time of stay abroad prior the first professorship, and therefore we took into consideration, for example, while studying abroad, so research stays, and also so we accumulated that through the phase of studying, the phase of the PhD, and the phase while working as a postdoc prior the appointment to first professorship, and we basically accumulated that through a score, and yeah, thereby we were able to assign every scholar an individual score, and based on that we created our ranking.
Okay. Okay, the last one. Yes, one more comment, and then we go to the last paper.
Just one quick question about you're checking career progression. So it's one dimension of career success, the objective one. So you check number of promotions, job offer, or those positions specifically academically. Did you check also some subjective aspect of career success, career satisfaction, learning? So just one more insight.
So maybe this is food for further research. Thank you so much. I will definitely consider this to improve the paper any further.
Okay, thank you very much, Felix. Now we go finally to the last paper. Kadit, your micro, please.
Can everyone see my slides? Yeah.
Yes.
All right. So thank you for having me. Today, I would like to present our paper entitled Foreign Direct Investment and Economic Growth in the Indonesian Manufacturing Sector. My name is Kadit Adisawitri, and on behalf of the other author, Louis Brennan, I would like to present our paper. So the agenda for today's presentation, the first one is the introduction, including the background of the studies, rationale behind the choice of Indonesia, and then the purpose of studies and the contribution of this paper. The second agenda is the methodology, including data collection, data processing, and data analysis. And the last one is the finding, including discussion and recommendation for Indonesian government. So the background of the studies, the background of the studies, there is a potential gap in the literature on the relationship between FDI and economic growth in terms of industry-specific effects. The studies of FDI and economic growth are divergent due to the fact that each study has different characteristics, such as the sample selection, the methodology, the time period, and analysis technique. And then why Indonesia? The studies that focus on the causality relationship between FDI and economic growth in Indonesia are rare. The studies related to FDI and economic growth that focus on specific dependent or independent variable in Indonesia are diverse in terms of their choice of variable studies. Given the country's large domestic market and ample human resources, Indonesia actually has a competitive advantage in the attraction of inward FDI. And then the manufacturing sector is the leading sector that drives other sectors in the upstream and downstream industry and hence impact on the Indonesian economy. So the purpose of the studies, these papers seek to determine the causality relationship between inward FDI and economic growth in Indonesian manufacturing sector without having predetermined the dependent or independent variable at start. This paper draws on the time series data from the manufacturing sector from 1990 to 2019. And then the research question is, what is the relationship of inward FDI and economic growth in Indonesia's manufacturing sector? So the contribution of this paper, first, it's uncovered the causality relationship between FDI and economic growth in the pioneering sector, so in the manufacturing sector in Indonesia. And then this paper contributes to the industry-specific effects by analyzing such a relationship. And then this paper also deploy underutilized method in the context of developing countries, like Indonesia, such as the Toda Yamamoto Dolado Leukopo augmented factor autoregression. So I move on to the methodology. I will go to each of the methodology section. So in the methodology, there are data collection, data processing, and data analysis. So the data collection, this paper draws on annual time series data, like I already mentioned in the previous slide. And then this paper employs secondary data from the recognized international institutions, such as World Bank and ILO, and then the data from the domestic institutions, such as Indonesian Investment Coordinating Board and Ministry of Industry. And then the variables that apply in this paper, the first one is inward FDI flow in the manufacturing sector, value added of the manufacturing sector to the total GDP, GDP per capita, employment in manufacturing sectors, export and import in manufacturing sectors, and then the total factor productivity. In the data processing, the nature of the collected data is varied due to its characteristic. Most of the data that are engaged in this paper shows as the percentage. For example, the value added in manufacturing to the total GDP, employment, export, and import, as well as the total factor productivity. Meanwhile, the other data, such as the inward FDI in manufacturing sector and then GDP per capita, are in absolute value in the constant price of US dollar. Therefore, in order to do the analysis, we need to transform the absolute value of data into the natural logarithm form. In the data analysis, so before conducting the TYDL task to investigate the causality relationship between inward FDI and economic growth variable, there are 3 steps involved. The first one is the unit root task to determine the integration order of the variables and to test whether the data is stationary or not. And then the factor autoregression and lag determination. The last one is the TYDL causality test. And then this is the possibility findings of the task. And then in the unit root task, this paper applied 3 approaches by ADF, PP task, and then KPSS task. And then after conducting the unit root task and identifying the degree of integration of individual series, the following step is the estimated farm model and determining the optimal lag length to perform the TYDL task. The optimal lag length is generated by comparing the lag order selected by each criteria that I already mentioned here. I'm not going through all the details of that. And then after we found the farm model estimated with the coefficient of D and K, we apply that model to the DYDL causality test. And then this is the possible finding of the DYDL causality test. And then I will move on to the findings. So the finding is there are two-way causality represented by the red line here between the inward FDI in manufacturing sector and then the ratio of value-added manufacture to the total GDP, as well as there is two-way causality of inward FDI in manufacturing sector and the employment in manufacturing sector. So what is the two-way causality is? Two-way causality, for example, in the employment. So inward FDI in manufacturing sector is a determinant of employment in manufacturing sector, and then employment in manufacturing sector is also a determinant of inward FDI in manufacturing sector. So there is one-way causality between inward FDI in manufacturing sector as a determinant of export, and then GDP per capita as a determinant of inward FDI, and then total factor productivity as a determinant of inward FDI. And then there's another finding in relation to the economic growth, which is we apply the ratio of value-added manufacture to the total GDP. So there is two-way causality between the ratio of value-added manufacture to the total GDP is a determinant of employment in manufacturing sector and vice versa. And then there is a one-way causality that represented by the blue line here. That ratio of value-added manufacture to the total GDP is the determinant of GDP per capita, export and import in manufacturing sector. So what is the finding told us? So the first one is inward FDI in manufacturing sector is a significant engine to boost economic growth in Indonesia via the value-added manufacture to the total GDP, employment in manufacturing sector, and then export in manufacturing sectors. And then the second point here, economic growth plays an important role in attracting inward FDI into Indonesia's manufacturing sector through the value-added manufacture to the total GDP, employment in manufacturing, GDP per capita, and then the total factor productivity. So the conclusion to this paper is, in order to boost Indonesia's economic growth through inward FDI in manufacturing sector, we generate several recommendations. So the first one is Indonesia's government should generate policies and regulations that can improve the performance of existing and future investment in the manufacturing sector. And then the second recommendation, Indonesia's government should boost the standard of education and provide the sound policies and regulation to improve the knowledge and technology spillover from the presence of MNCs. The next recommendation, Indonesia's government should focus on export-oriented MNC and encourage existing MNC to improve their performance in the exports. And then the next recommendation is Indonesia's government should boost the productivity of the country, not only in manufacturing sector, but also in other priority sectors. And then thank you for tuning in. We hope that you enjoy our presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. Any question?
Hello, congratulations for your work. I think that the relationship between FDI and growth is almost still is a fact in literature. And I think that your results are quite expected. But I think that this is a suggestion for your research agenda, that the relevant point for developing countries, and from Brazil, and I can tell you this, is okay, FDI generates growth and employment and all these things, but what kind of growth, what kind of employment, and what kind of skills and which are the distributive effects of FDI into developing countries. I think you have a starting point, but before you do, you recommend some policies, I think it is important to know better which industries are the FDI going in, which kind of industries, what kind of employment are generating, what kind of skills, and which is the kind of added value that this FDI is generating in Indonesia. I missed also, you speak something about your theoretical framework and mention something about how Indonesia is insert in the global value chain. Okay, that's.
Thank you so much for your comments. Actually, in the paper itself, they provided like in which types of industry, in which kind of employment, and it was evaluated that the inward FDI contribute to the economic growth, because this is just like a highlights of what the paper is all about. And then in terms of the you mentioned about how to link that with the global value chains, which is really interesting as well, because I just got an input this morning about that as well when I presented another paper. And then I think I missed one of the relationship is kind of expected between inward FDI and economic growth. Actually, that's what the contribution is, because like most of the studies focus on the country level, and then this one is more relates on the industry perspective. Because, you know, like in terms of the development of Indonesia as well, like because manufacturing industry is so obvious that can create more employment in the field, and then what can Indonesia do in terms of if they see that there's a connection between that variables, and then what can Indonesia develop from that. So thank you very much for your comments and inputs.
Well, I appreciate very much the comments of the Brazilian colleague, because my question is, clearly FDI have a positive drift on the economy, but the problem is, are they increasing the innovation potential of the local firms? Are they helping the country to lower the high-tech sectors, or are they continuing the kind of role of dependence of those countries from a multinational that simply go there to use a cheap job and produce shoes? Because this is the idea that you have in mind when you give suggestions to the government, not just that FDI are positive, because this is obvious. They create jobs, this is obvious. But in my view, I will be more sophisticated in asking, in understanding which is the real effect of innovation, because now countries are competing for their innovative side. And in Brazil, I've been studying with other Brazilian colleagues these things. Otherwise, you don't make really interesting analysis. So try to do also this.
Yeah, actually, I mentioned about that again in the paper, like specific approach, that the specific recommendation for that. I just put it as a highlights of for the paper, I mean for the presentation perspective. And then you mentioned about like what's the Indonesian do in terms of the because we we conduct a different studies as well about the investment development path in the perspective of inward FDI and outward FDI. And then the fact from that, actually, is really interesting because Indonesia pursue inward FDI extensively, and they forgot about the outward FDI because there's a stigma where people think that if you engage with outward FDI, meaning that you want to run away from tax or something like that. So that's why the government not look into the outward FDI and how to create some sort of environment domestically in Indonesia, that by the president of MNC, and then they escalate the competitive, the ownership of advantage of the domestic companies so they can engage with the outward FDI. That actually a phenomena that happened in Indonesia because they are extensively attract inward FDI come to Indonesia without being selective, or this is the type of inward FDI that can create a sustainability to the economic development. So that thing actually, I did mention it in the paper, but maybe I didn't mention it in the presentation, so I missed in that part. So yeah, your point actually is really correct, because this is the highlight of the paper as well. What's the Indonesian do, not just attracting the inward FDI to the manufacturing sector, for example, what type of indirect FDI that really need to sustain the growth of economic Indonesia, that can contribute to the employment, that can contribute to the domestic companies and so on. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. So I think it's time to finish. So thank you very much to the authors for the very good presentations and defense of your papers. Every paper has had a particular interesting point, different perspective, different topics. To the attendees for the very interesting comments and questions. Fiona, thank you very much always for your comments and your suggestions. So it's time to finish. I hope to see you soon, to all of you. So in the next conference, I hope. So bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Goodbye.
Thank you.